Funkytown, by Maxine Evergreen. Chapter 1, First Meeting. It was a nice day in New York City. Spider-Man was fighting Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus at the same time. It was just 40 minutes into battle. The three men seemed to be frozen in place. The sound of a gentle song could be heard. The men turned to see a small girl with short brunette hair, and a strip of white hair in her bangs. Her costume donned a music note and the outfit itself consisted of shades of green. Her gloves were fishnets and were dark green. She also had fish ears and slitted eyes. The eyes themselves didn't look too human, light green and a slight glow to them as well. She looked like she could be no older than the web-slinging hero. Despite her size, she definitely read as 18 years old. Her voice was a melody of something sweet mixed with something a little sinister, as if she understood how innocent she looked and would definitely use that to an advantage. The Green Goblin continued kicking the spider's ass, but the doc was distracted, not by the song, but by the girl in her entirety. He couldn't help himself. She was just so intoxicating with the way she held herself. Her movements spoke to him in a way that screamed she wanted attention, and he wanted to be the man to give it to her. The singing continued to get louder and louder until the civilians around them were giving all their precious belongings to the sweet little villainess. Jewels and gold watches were in the girl's hands now. Doc Ock was simply admiring this girl's work. "That's some quick work for a little girl like you," spoke the doctor in his slight British accent, which earned him a snarl in response. "Little girl," the singer answered sassily, "I am not a little girl, I am Siren, and I am 18 years old and I have been doing this for a very long time." She punctuated her point with a dramatic pose. "My apologies, you just look very little for your age," the doctor replied, feeling genuine foolishness for his assumption. "So I assume your powers have something to do with singing and/or music." "Indeed, much like everyone who has the unfortunate gift of getting into this corny town, I was mutated in a lab, but uniquely, I wasn't the one who did this to me, nor was it an accident. My father, Drive Evergreen, had the idea to turn my childish tantrums from when I was a baby into something deadly. But of course, I grew up and my power had grown up alongside me," she explained, seemingly embarrassed by the backstory. "So the original plan was for you to have super screams?" the doctor asked, trying hard not to laugh. "Dr. Evergreen though, I remember him. He brought his little girl into the lab all the time. Me and Norman used to think nothing of it. We assumed he had no babysitter to watch her. We had no idea you were being subjected to such horrible experiments," he said, admitting the fault to be partially his own. "That's not entirely your fault though. My father was a scientist thirsting for knowledge, and he would do anything for it. Looking back, I actually resent my mother more for leaving me with that crazy man." The two of them shared a glance for a second until the Green Goblin shouted for Doc Ock to pay him some mind. When the doctor turned around, he saw the goblin, tied to a light pole, upside down and stuck in the webs of the spider hero. Doc Ock got to work freeing his cohort and continuing the battle they were in before Siren had interrupted. Siren, on the other hand, continued to force the people of NYC to give up their belongings. This time, however, she went after more valued items, car keys specifically. She seemed to be content with how her life was turning out. Despite all the trauma and sadness that followed her, she was as happy as a kid on Christmas morning. She continued to do her rating of the townspeople. Once she was bored, she sat on top of a light pole and watched the fight, silently cheering for Dr. Octopus. Siren ended up getting bored of that and decided to go home. Getting into her lavish mansion, Maxine Evergreen took off her boots at the door, letting her petite frame get even shorter. Her father, the scumbag that he was, greeted her while holding out a plate of finger foods. "Hello, my sweet little cockroach, how was your day?" he spoke to his daughter, genuinely sounding sweet. The man was met with the same sass he had been given ever since she found out he had something to do with her current predicament. "I saw Professor Octavius out on the street today," Maxine admitted, not exactly telling the whole truth with her statement. "Did you now, or did you see Dr. Octopus?" Mr. Evergreen said, smiling a bit scarily at his daughter, seemingly aware of her little outing that very morning. Maxine looked up at her father, fear playing on her face. She wasn't expecting him to know, and she was hoping he didn't know about Siren, or that the doctor was now aware of what exactly Dr. Evergreen's experiments entailed. But maybe she could just use her song and force him to forget he even knew about her outing. "What is the one rule I have set for you?" her father asked, putting a hand on her chin to force her gaze up at him. "Don't ever think about going outside without your knowledge," Maxine answered, frowning ever so slightly. "That's right, my little cockroach. But you've disobeyed me. You've done it again and again. Tomorrow, I want you to go back out there and give back every last thing you forced those poor townspeople to give you," he said, his voice stern. He meant business. "And when you are done returning what you stole, I demand you walk your little self up to that nice room I spent my good cash on, and I want you to lock yourself in and never come out again. I don't care if your little school friends are in frat houses or sorority clubs, I want you hidden. I'm not doing this to be a jerk. I'm doing this to keep you and I safe. What would happen if you went out and someone saw your ears? Or your eyes? I know you want to live your life and be around people your age, but as your father, I want you to be at your best, safe and happy. I wouldn't know what I would do with myself if something happened to you. Honestly, you should thank me. Without me, I think you would just shrivel up and die." Mr. Evergreen stared at his daughter with a glare. He didn't want to be hurtful, but he was getting tired of the sass and snarky attitude she had been giving him for the past few years. Maxine simply rolled her eyes. She marched up to her room, not locking the door, but instead she slammed the door, dramatically flopping over her bed. She doesn't completely understand why her dad is so protective of her. She was technically an adult now, so she should be able to do as she pleased. She wished her mother had taken her with her. She pushed her head into her velvet pillow and screamed. She hated how strict her father was. She hated how he was the way he was, even though this whole thing was all his fault. She was about to continue crying until she saw the balcony to her window, and a light bulb went off in her brain. If her father wasn't going to let her live out in the real world, then she was just going to have to show him that she was capable and ready to face the world. She set a bag on her bed and immediately began packing up her costume and several regular clothes. She made it a point to pack sunglasses and a beanie to disguise her inhuman flaws. Carefully and quietly, she climbed down the vines of flowers that hung on her balcony. Once hitting the ground floor, she put on the glasses and hat and went around to see if her new friends were still committing acts of violence in the city. She couldn't find them, so she assumed they were hiding in Oscorp. She went there instinctively. She rolled up to the front doors, finding the place unlocked. She stepped in. Going to her father's office, she found the place lacking any sign of recent activity. It was obvious that he hadn't been in the place for quite a while. Maxine decided to look through the drawers. She found a jar of wasted lollipops, most likely meant for a younger her whenever she did whatever he had asked of her. She also found a teddy bear and she immediately tore the thing apart. The most shocking thing of all was a letter from her father to her mother. The letter was an apology. Why would he write a letter to her but never actually send it? She put the letter in her bag. She left the room and went to find Dr. Octavius Domain. He was there all right. He was updating his tentacles after they had been mangled by Spider-Man's beating. He looked kind of hot with the way the light of the room hit him. Maxine watched for a second before she decided to get his attention. Hi, Octavius," she said slightly above a whisper, catching the doctor off guard. "Maxine, what brings you to Oscorp? I would assume such a place would bring up such awful memories." He turned to her, grinning genuinely. This wasn't the same grin he gives Spider-Man, nor is it the condescending type that her father is known for. "Yeah, unfortunately, I don't really have a choice. My father was a little more than furious at me for this morning's incident. He's way more upset than I was out there hanging around you," she said, solemnly. "Is that so?" said Octavius, who had turned back to his work. "And here I thought your dad was my friend. I could have guessed better. A selfish man can't have friends. It surprises me he even had a wife, let alone they had you." "You know my mom?" Maxine asked, her eyes lighting up in happiness and curiosity. "Can you tell me about her? What was she like, and do you know where she is now?" Single quote. Suddenly, as if someone turned off his on switch, the doctor's mood changed drastically. Your mother. I'm surprised he hadn't told you before. He mumbled, causing the young adult to want to press further questions, but she didn't have to press. She watched the man take a seat. He looked like he was debating actually telling her anything. Angelica Evergreen, the vivacious woman she was. She loved your father like her life depended on it. Which, considering how things turned out, that is exactly how it was. You see, before you turned into a walking pin cushion for his needles, it was Angelica. The poor woman couldn't conceive a child. So, your father decided to take it upon himself to try making a serum to give them a life they both deserved. Of course, there are always side effects to these things. Obviously, they had their child, at the cost of Angelica's life, the doctor said, looking right at Maxine to look for signs of discomfort or sorrow, and her reaction was just as he expected. Maxine was very clearly holding back tears as she learned she had technically been the reason her mother was no longer around. So now that I have that cleared up, I was wondering if I could stay at your place for as long as humanly possible. Because if I had to go back to my own home, I promise you that man will be meeting my mother, she said, half joking. You want to stay at my home? I've seen your place. My home is nothing compared to the absolute castle you live in. I don't think you'd like the small house I live in, he answered, even though he so desperately wanted to say yes to her. Come on, OCTY, I need the shelter and you're really cool and funny and nice and I just really like your company, she said, trying so hard not to smile about it. Alright, fine. But only because you have a pretty face and a nice smile, also because your dad's a jerk, Octavius replied. But there will have to be some rules. But don't worry your pretty little head. I won't go too crazy with the rules because you are an adult after all. Octavius smiled, but cursed under his breath because he burned his hand by accident. Maxine was over the moon about this. She was so happy, she could hug him, but knowing the kind of guy he was, she couldn't risk being torn apart by his tentacles. She stood beside him, watching him fix his tentacles. She was fascinated with his work. She couldn't lie, she did find him very hot. Bad battle, huh? She asked, looking up at him, taking off her sunglasses, and placed a hand on his shoulder, having to get on her tippy toes slightly. Nothing I haven't seen before. He has done worse. He sighed, continuing to fix the tentacle. He kept his eye on his machine but also sometimes glanced at the girl now occupying the science lab alongside him. She looked kind of pretty yet out of place in the dingy laboratory dominated by mainly men. Like a lamb to a slaughter. But he couldn't slaughter her. He may be a criminal but he still had a heart. Maxine let out a small yawn, slightly snuggling into her sweater for warmth. She also snuggled closer to Octavius, finding the heat of his body oddly comforting. So, you got a girl? She asked him innocently, smiling up at him once they made eye contact. He didn't smile back however, he just stared at her with those eyes that bore into hers. Not at this current point in time, my wife, Rosie. She was killed in an accident by broken glass impaling her, he said, a look of sorrow showing in his eyes, but he didn't want Maxine to dwell on his past mistakes. I'm surprised your father married your mom, he seems like the type to not want to settle down. Oh man, you should have seen him the day he got fired. He was so pissed off. Norman and I burned some of the stuff he left behind. We only left the stuff we thought you should see. We had a bet, and because you showed up here after 12 years, Songbird, you just got me a ticket to the theater tonight. He laughed, a sound that rumbled low in his throat. Maxine frowned slightly, feeling a sense of sorrow at the thought of him losing his wife, but she was snapped back to the present because Octavius is giving her a look. But if I had to choose someone to remarry, I think I'd want them to be you, he said, smiling at her. He moved an arm to the small of her back, holding her a bit closer. Maxine snuggled further into him, smiling contently and still yawning, covering her mouth in a means of politeness. Are you done yet? I'm really bored and tired. I'm also kind of hungry too. This is a sweet moment, but I think I'd rather be doing this in the comfort of your house. She half whined, her big green eyes pleading for him. Fine, Songbird, I guess I could do this at the home lab, but I would need to take some supplies with me, so give me a second. You can go wait for me outside or you can come with me to the basement, he said, gently. But if you choose to go outside, I will warn you, it might take a long time. I can go wait. This place smells like mildew and sweat, manly sweat, she said, commenting on the fact that mainly men had worked at Oscorp. Fine by me. He smiled, gently letting go of her and going to the elevator to get into the basement of the building. Maxine walked out the front door, putting on her sunglasses again as she waited for Octavius to come outside. She watched as some of the civilians walked around and did their own things. She wished that she could trade lives with one of them and live a normal life. She kept fantasizing about the life she wished she had and couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy for those who got to live in normal society. Perhaps if she hadn't given herself to a life of crime, she would have had a chance and been a real member of NYC. She was pulled out of her trance when Otto walked out of Oscorp, with his tentacles in a large black bag. He signaled for her to follow him and she instantly followed him down the street to his home. He hadn't lived that far, so they didn't need a car. They approached the front door and Maxine was quite pleased with what she was seeing. Despite what Otto had said about his home earlier, this was far from being poor. He lived in a mansion himself, though it was a little smaller than the Evergreen estate, it was still bigger than the average home in the city. Otto let Maxine enter first, and she was even more impressed by the inside than the outside. She saw a lot of statues and other art pieces, and some photos of Rosie. He was still thinking about her. She was most enchanted by a nice piano that sat front and center in the hall between the kitchen and dining room. You know how to play? She asked him in surprise. She truly wasn't expecting that, nor was she expecting him to like art. I play whenever I feel high amounts of stress. It's calming. Now, what do you want for dinner? He asked, smiling warmly at the girl. Chinese takeout sounds good right now. Never had it though. Honestly, I'm just repeating words I hear on the street whenever I sneak out, she replied, returning his nice warm smile. Sounds nice. I wouldn't have minded cooking for you though. Otto's smile only grew with each word he spoke to her. He pressed a kiss to her head. Maxine walked around the house, getting familiar with her surroundings. She got comfortable on the velvet couch in one of the hallways. She dozed off. Otto walked over and sat beside her. He watched her for a second, silently admiring her sleeping form before he decided to go to his in-home lab and got to work fixing his tentacles. He was still thinking about her. He couldn't shake the feeling of warmth he felt when his mind wandered to anything related to her. He truly loved her. He never really cared for anyone the way he does her. Sure, he had Norman, but he was just a friend. Maxine was different. Very different. He wanted to give his entire life to that woman, and they had only reunited that morning. He continued to work. He should get a hold of backup metal soon. The hero was getting way too fancy with his fighting skills and it was starting to get on the doctor's nerves. Otto was pulled out of his thoughts when he heard the doorbell. The food had arrived. He dragged himself back up the stairs, but he stopped in his tracks when he saw Maxine had answered the door and paid for their food all on her own. Otto had been kicking his own ass for not being quick enough to get up the stairs. Nonetheless, he was proud of her for not being arrogant. He watched as she brought the bag of food into the dining hall. I could have gotten that, he told her, but it was clear that he was nowhere near upset. You were busy. I thought it'd be nice of me to lend a helping hand. She smiled at him, her gentle features melting his heart even further. That's fair, but please let me do the answering next time. This is my home after all, he said, taking her hand and taking her to one end of the table. He opened the chair for her. She sat down and he tucked the chair in and went to the opposite end and sat in the chair that mirrored hers. They chatted about her family and she continued to ask him questions and he in turn answered to the best of his knowledge. She seemed a great deal happier at his house than she ever was living with her father. She couldn't help but feel like her life finally had purpose and she was finally getting to the best part of it. "Do you go to college, Songbird?" Otto asked, making Maxine quirk her head slightly. She was perplexed by the question, as if Otto had asked her a difficult math quiz. "Oh come on, you know, the place you go to after high school," he continued, only confusing the girl further. "HGH school, oh. My father homeschooled me in kindergarten through 12th grade levels," she answered, finally getting what he was asking. This answer shocked Otto. He wasn't expecting that as a response. Sure, he knew Dr. Evergreen was the worst of the worst, but he couldn't imagine such a smart guy to not let his daughter go to get education in a public setting. He was a bit angry, but kept his cool for now. "Doesn't matter to me though. My father always said I had a brilliant mind, like him." I realize now that the statement was most likely just his narcissistic way of saying I would turn out like him. Which I can safely say, it hasn't happened yet. Maxine smiled despite the awkward conversation. Otto seemed taken aback by the girl's sunny attitude. He wasn't expecting her to be so happy, even after a trauma dump like the one she just did. He had an idea. He was going to sign her up for high school so she can get some college credits, and that way, she'll be able to go to college and experience a taste of normal life. Of course, he won't force her to do anything she doesn't want to do. He wanted to give her a choice. She was an adult after all, and he didn't want to give her a reason to abandon him the way she had done her father. Maxine watched him. She clearly understood he was thinking about her education, and she wasn't opposed to the idea. "I would love to go to high school. I think I could use the experience," she told him, smiling. The two of them began talking about the different high schools in the city, trying to figure out the best possible choice for her. Otto couldn't help feeling like he saw a younger Rosie every time Maxine spoke or looked at him. Of course, he understood they were two completely different women. The way Maxine smiled though, it was so much like Rosie. Otto wondered if this was a sign that he should definitely go out with Maxine. Maybe she was his second chance. Maxine snapped him out of his thoughts by starting a conversation about a heist idea she had been hatching for a while now. She told him that her plan involved her power being a distraction for him to rob the bank. It would be super easy, she told him, smiling. Otto was immediately on board, calling her brilliant. Which he took back, realizing she was probably reminded of her father when he said that. He was snapped out of his overthinking because Maxine was now staring at him, smiling widely. "You really think so?" she asked, holding back tears, and holding her hands up to her face. "Of course, your father was simply stifling your growth as an intelligent individual," Otto told her, smiling sweetly. The two of them continued to talk and eat. Otto watched her. He was enchanted by her beauty. The sun was going down, and Otto, the old bat he was, decided that it was time to go to bed. Unfortunately, he only had the one bed, so he let Maxine sleep beside him. It was kind of awkward having someone sleep where Rosie used to. He wasn't expecting to move on, especially so soon. Nonetheless, she was beautiful and her pajamas hugged her curves beautifully. Late into the night, Maxine was woken up to the sound of the piano. She got scared believing the house was haunted. She turned to where Otto was sleeping, but she found nothing. She got out of bed and went downstairs. When she reached the bottom of the steps, she saw Otto, sitting at the piano, playing We'll Meet Again. She walked over and sat beside him, humming the tune as he played. She wanted to sing fully but felt scared as she thought she was going to accidentally trance him with her song.